Who would have thought that Marvel's best comic is a tie-in to the Queen in Black? Although Queen in Black is starting to pick up steam and it is getting really, really good. So this story focuses on Eddie Brock, of all people. And in the aftermath of everything that had happened with regards to Death Spiral, which was essentially a crossover between Spider-Man, Venom, and Carnage, Eddie Brock found himself in prison. And as the guy who has historically been the host for the Venom symbiote, he's now without any symbiote at all. And so for the most part, he's just kind of there. What's also really interesting is that at the beginning, it looks like he's talking to himself or potentially talking to Venom. Now, Venom is of course bonded to Mary Jane Watson in the here and now in Marvel Comics. So obviously he's not talking to her. And that's where things are cool because he kind of talks to himself about the idea that he may have screwed up, but then the voice responds to him in saying, "Yes, Eddie, mistakes were made." And so that's where Eddie responds, right? And just says, "Maybe we deserve this, or I do anyway. I bonded with Carnage. What the hell was I thinking?" And the response to this disembodied voice, "You didn't have a choice, Eddie. I was gone and you needed something. I understand why you did the things you did." Now, here's what he's talking about here, because one of the things to remember is that Eddie Brock as Venom has had a very lengthy story within Marvel Comics, right? Going all the way back to David Michelini. But in more recent years, we saw him becoming the King in Black after the initial defeat of Null and all the stuff that went with it. We got the Venom War storyline and so on and so forth. At the end of Venom War, Eddie Brock was dying and he needed to bond to something, and the Venom symbiote had already left. And so that's why he ended up bonding to Carnage. And Carnage effectively healed him, right? So he was able to survive even without a symbiote, but the two of them were sort of mentally locked together in the sense that a lot of it was just manipulation at the hands of Carnage, right? In the actual like mini-series, maxi-series, really, that we got from Marvel Comics. But in the aftermath of all of that, it's one of these things where it points to the idea that yes, he bonded with Carnage. Yes, Carnage is just a psychopathic symbiote, but the alternative was death. And so at the end of the day, there really wasn't much in the way of a choice here. But that's where a couple of guards who were seemingly heading towards Eddie Brock's cell realize he's talking to someone. And in fact, they're just kind of like, be alert, right? Because I mean, you know, like, Eddie Brock's historically Venom. So like, why wouldn't you be? And that's where you see this kind of like shadow of a symbiote on a wall, right? And that's where you end up realizing Eddie is talking to himself, right? The voice of what's traditional the symbiote, right? The black speech bubble that's kind of skewed and twisted, that's coming from his own mouth. And he's saying, it's very difficult for us to be apart. Now, I don't know whether or not this is gonna go in a meaningful direction, but the idea that Eddie Brock is seemingly kind of developing like a almost Green Goblin type personality for himself, but in the form of a symbiote, it's cool. It's pretty dope. And so that's where he looks up at the guards and he asks, like, do you guys need anything? And they tell him, you have a visitor, right? There's a lawyer come to see you. And initially, Eddie Brock's first thought is that it's Matt Murdock, because Matt Murdock has helped him out in a pinch before. And of course, as most of you guys know, Matt Murdock being Daredevil is like a lawyer to the superheroes and sometimes the supervillains, depending on the circumstance, but he is damn good at what he does. So if you find yourself tossed in the slammer, Matt Murdock is the guy you want to reach out to. But that's where you end up finding out it's not Matt. It's actually this guy named Jerry McLeod Esquire. And this guy's the crappiest lawyer that I have ever heard of in the real world or in fiction, right? Because he sits down with Eddie and starts talking to him, right? And it's like, okay, like, let's have a conversation. Let's figure out what's going on here. And so Eddie asked the question, right? Did someone hire you for me? And that's where Jerry just says, in a way, right? The state pays the bill. I'm a public defender. I go where they send me. So you ripped off the arm of Misty Knight. And he's like, well, I mean, it's a little more complicated than that. He's like, yeah, but like you ripped off the arm of an FBI agent. So, I mean, I'll be honest, man, like that's bad, right? That's what landed you here in the first place, right? That's where he says, Mr. Brock, look, you are in the Raft, a mega max prison for superpowered criminals. You're here because of that business with Misty Knight, plus additional killings to which the Bureau can connect you. And of course, that leads to Eddie saying, no, right? Those were serial killers. I was doing the FBI's job for them, because that's true, right? One of the things to keep in mind is that when he was bonded to the Carnage symbiote, he was actually a killer of killers, right? But at the end of the day, the Fuzz doesn't really tolerate vigilantism, regardless of whether or not you support it. And that's what they're really hanging around the neck of Eddie Brock. Ironically enough, it's one of these situations where the FBI is fine when you're doing it, but then when you're done, hey, we can't allow that to happen, man, and like they end up tossing you into the slammer, right? That's kind of the deal, the bad rap that Eddie Brock has found himself in. And that's where Jerry tells him, I believe you, pal, but their position is that when you did have powers, you used them to do bad things. Because one of the things that Eddie talks about is he doesn't have powers anymore, right? But Jerry continues on. They can't be sure that those powers are completely gone, and they cannot be sure that you will be a good guy from now on. So you're in the raft. Because keep in mind, when it comes to Eddie Brock, a piece of the Venom symbiote always kind of stayed behind in the form of a codex, right? So the idea is that he always returns as Venom in some capacity, even leaving the codex out. That's the nature of his character, right? He's been Venom, he's lost the symbiote, he's gone back to being Venom. And so the authorities just kind of look at him and it's like, at any moment, this guy could become Venom again, right? So that's one of the other reasons why they have him here. And so that's where Jerry continues on and he says, the reality is that you are not gonna get a trial and you don't really have rights, because Eddie asks about that. And Jerry tells him the nature of what really goes on with the raft. And it's kind of cool to see that this is how things function even within the Marvel universe. Now, it sucks that it plays out this way, but what Jerry basically tells him is like, you're in pretrial detention, right? So the reality is you're awaiting a trial, and that's how they're gonna be able to hold you pretty much indefinitely, because they're just gonna continually postpone your trial. Because of the actions you've engaged in the past, the justification for putting you in pretrial detention was the idea that you are too much of a danger to be let out into the world before your trial happens. But they're gonna keep postponing your trial over and over and over again, and it'll be a way to basically end run your constitutional right to be free or to have a verdict judged against you, right? It's basically a way for them to keep you locked up forever. And he says, even if you do get your day in court, they'll use every trick in the book to make sure you stay here forever. Now, here's kind of the writing between the lines. You have to believe that guys like Tony Stark and Steve Rogers know about this. There's no way they can't. There's no way they could be completely unaware that things like this happen. Yet no real meaningful effort is made to correct these actions. Now, that's kind of my personal opinion on it, right? Your take may be completely different here, but what it looks like is you're talking about effectively the manipulation of the judicial system within the Marvel universe to keep people who are perceived as dangerous criminals jailed indefinitely, even by circumventing their constitutional rights. It's pretty corrupt, right? It's really, really corrupt. And so that's where Eddie just asked, right? Like, what am I supposed to do, right? How do I get out of this place? And Jerry just tells him, there's a way, right? You want a big crisis out there in the world where you're the only one who can save the day. And I've seen it happen plenty of times. There's some virus that pops up, there's some alien invasion that happens, your optic beams are the only way to offer some kind of a weakness to whatever this foe happens to be. But you want to be able to bring something to the table, a bargaining chip, and then you use that in order to get yourself out. That's the only way that you can escape here. And so Jerry asked the question, is there anything special about you? And Eddie Brock kind of harkens back and is like, there was at one point, but not anymore, right? When I was brought into the Venom symbiote, I mean, I was about as close as any one person got to being God, but I'm just like a dude in a cell now. And like, that's it. And so that's where you realize how crappy of a lawyer Jerry is, right? Because he says, look, I'm gonna do my best for you, but to be honest, man, my best is not very good. And he's like, I'm not saying that to discourage you, it's just motivation. I'm not gonna be able to save you, man. You have to save yourself. What a terrible thing to say to your client, right? I mean, those of you fans out there who are lawyers, tell me I'm wrong. Nothing about this can be legal, right? Like literally his lawyer tells him, look, man, I suck at my job. So there's a very low likelihood I'm gonna be able to get you out of here, right? You're gonna have to figure out something, right? He says, figure out that special thing about you, whatever it is, so that when your moment comes, you will be ready, right? Everyone has something. And at that point, he leaves. And so for the most part, it's basically Eddie Brock killing time, right? Because we start kind of jumping between these moments, right? We get this kind of fast track here. Week 1, there's visitors like Anaconda, Griffin, Ice Master, Nexus, right? All these guys are getting visitors. Week 2, guys are getting visitors. Week 3, week 4, so on, all the way to week 9. Now, it turns out that people have either been released or whatever the case happens to be because the names on the list are getting smaller and smaller. But that's where you find out Eddie Brock has a visitor. And so of course he ends up going to see that person, which turns out to be Peter Parker. Now, it's not uncharacteristic for Peter to be here, given everything that happened during the Death Spiral event. The fact that Peter actually held a personal grudge against Eddie for bonding with the Carnage symbiote, because Peter didn't know that Eddie had bonded to Carnage until the Death Spiral event. And that was kind of the thing where Peter was like, you know what Carnage is. Number one, he's the son of Venom. And number two, you know how psychotic Carnage is. Why would you bond yourself to something so sadistic? And that was Eddie bonding himself to the Carnage symbiote and making the argument and saying he was trying to keep it under control. He was trying to keep the Carnage symbiote maintained, and he thought he could. Right? But over time, by and by, the Carnage symbiote got more and more into him to the point that it was actually controlling the body of Eddie when Eddie was sleeping. So he had to like be on his guard 100% of the time. It was kind of nuts. But Peter being here isn't really to like beat Eddie Brock over the head. I mean, it is a little bit, right? But it's not really like the main purpose for being here, because Eddie asked him, why are you here? And Peter says, I just thought to check on you, Eddie. It has to be tough being in a place like this. And Eddie's just like, spare me, man, right? If you really wanted to help, you'd get me out of here one way or another. And he even presents like the Spider-Man symbol. It's like, look, man, I mean, you know, like you could get me out of this joint, just break me out of here. And Peter Parker's like, look, man, chill, right? Like, I'm not going to break into the raft to get you out, right? Like, that's not going to happen. But he says, look, maybe there's a silver lining here, right? I mean, your dad died, and after everything that happened with Torment, right, the main villain, quote unquote, if you want to call him that, during Death Spiral, taking a break may not be the worst thing, right? Being here in the raft will give you time to decompress, to figure out what it is that you want to do next, to have some kind of meaningful impact in the world. And so I don't necessarily know that I would disagree with that statement. I think it's a fairly reasonable assessment by Peter. At that point, Eddie's just kind of like, so you mean get clean? Right? Because one of the things that's been going on here with Eddie, and one of the big points that Peter has been making historically when it came to Eddie Brock, is that he's addicted to the symbiote. For him, it's like a drug or alcohol. It's something he can't kick. So while sure, there have been various instances where Eddie has lost the symbiote and regained it, in a lot of those instances, it was him reluctantly losing it, having to give it up, or it being taken from him, and him fighting the fight to keep it. While at the same time, the instant the opportunity presents itself for him to regain the symbiote, he does it with reckless abandon because he's addicted to it. He has to have it. And honestly, it makes perfect sense, right? If you were a person in the world right now and you feel a sense of helplessness, and then I came to you and said, hey, here's this thing that will solve every problem that you have, would you give it up? Of course not. It would make you feel like God. And that's how Eddie Brock feels when it comes to the symbiote. You understand the profound significance that it has on his life. It gives him the feeling of being someone. It gives him the feeling of mattering. And that is a very, very human need. People want to be needed. And so at that point, he almost kind of lashes out at Peter because Peter sort of chastises him about bonding to Carnage. And Eddie Brock's response, so did you, Peter Parker. You bonded to him too. Now, there are differences. Peter was not bonded to the Carnage symbiote nearly as long as Eddie Brock was, and Peter certainly wasn't going on like a vigilante quest in the same way that Eddie Brock was. But the fact is, there is some reason to call Peter a hypocrite because he willingly bonded to the Carnage symbiote. And so that's where he says, I don't need your moralizing. I need you to get me out of here. I am not a criminal, right? Does Murdoch know that I'm in here? Can you call him? Let him know what's happening. And that's where Peter's just kind of like, yeah, he knows. And if he thought that he should get you out of here, you would already be out. And so he's like, look, I'm going to bounce out of here, man. Like, I have stuff that I need to go and do. I was just here to check on you. And so, of course, Eddie ends up asking Peter about Dylan. Now, this seems innocuous and it seems small, but it's incredibly telling because one of the things to remember is that Dylan is the son of Eddie Brock. And it's one of these things where after the events of King in Black and Eddie Brock had become the new King in Black, replacing Null after Null's defeat, he kind of became the leader of the symbiote hive mind across the universe. And because he had his son Dylan, he couldn't be in two places at once. So he actually ended up leaving Dylan behind on Earth with the Venom symbiote while Eddie himself went to go play his role as the King in Black. Now, he did argue, and it was a reasonable argument, that he now has a level of responsibility that's greater than that of being a father, because without a King in Black to lead them, the symbiotes would just run amok across the universe. And who knew what would happen? But at the end of the day, name one responsible parent that would abdicate the responsibility as a parent, right? When you become a parent, whether you intend to or not, right? You knock some girl up and then find out, oh my God, I totally didn't plan for it, even though the most basic nature of human beings is that touching naughty bits with no protection will usually generate a child, right? In the case of Eddie, he was kind of dropped off on his doorstep and he didn't even know that Dylan Brock existed. But when you become a parent and you step into that role, you have to be of the mindset that you would let the world burn before you let anything happen to your kid, right? That is a reality of what it means to be a parent. And so historically, that's where a lot of the tension between Eddie and Dylan comes from. But I bring all this up because even though Eddie has made statements about the idea that his son is more important to him than he used to be, and so on and so forth, the first chance he gets to talk to someone about what's going on the outside, he doesn't ask about his son. He asks about getting himself out. He focuses on himself first. And then only at the end of the conversation does he ask about Dylan. It's a very telling moment for his character that despite everything he will say, he himself is his first and foremost concern. So again, your opinion may differ on that, but that's kind of my interpretation of the whole thing. But Peter just kind of tells him, look, he's a moody kid, right? He does what moody teenagers do, right? That kind of thing. You need to worry about yourself, right? And ultimately walks away. Well, in that moment, that's when the events of Queen in Black #1 kick off, right? Hela launching a symbiote invasion of Earth, while Null is out there in space as the god of the light force, basically marshaling his forces with the intention of going to war with Hela and destroying her. But in seeing all of this go down, Eddie realizes, because it's being broadcast on the news, live on TV, Eddie realizes there's effectively a symbiote invasion underway on Earth. And that's when he harkens back to the words of Jerry and is like, this is my shot. This is my chance. He runs up on one of the guards and pleads his case, right? Like, I'm an expert in this stuff, man. You need to get me in contact with someone. And that's where the guard's like, really? Okay, cool. So who do you want me to call? And Eddie, he doesn't say Ghostbusters, but there's got to be a Ghostbusters joke in there somewhere. I know it's coming to the comment section. No. Eddie's just like, get me in contact with the Avengers. And the guard's like, oh, yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, I got Cap on speed dial. Let me just call him up real quick. No, the reality here is that, like, they could, right? The Raft does have the ability to contact the Avengers, but in the midst of a full-scale planetary invasion, I doubt they're sitting back at headquarters playing cards, right? They're dealing with all of that. So even if there was a concerted effort to reach the Avengers, it probably wouldn't be immediate. However, once they realized that Eddie Brock had information on how they could potentially win or at least deal with the symbiotes, yeah, they would respond immediately. The issue here is that the guard just doesn't take him seriously, and none of the other prisoners take him seriously, right? They're like, oh, yeah, we're experts as well. You can get us out of here too, right? We all know about symbiotes, right? We're all aware of them in some way, right? The whole thing is made a mockery of by the guard and the prisoners and the whole 9 yards. And so Eddie does the only thing he can. He clocks the guard, and then in that moment grabs his radio and it's just like, you have to get me, some outside information. You have to give me an outside contact, that kind of thing. A whole riot breaks out within the cell block, right? So if anything, this is a distraction, right? It actually gives Eddie Brock the opportunity to dodge a couple of guards and try to escape. But the instant that happens, he's locked up in a cell, right? He's literally shocked. He's tased by one of the guards and tossed into solitary confinement. And that's the cool thing, because while he's sitting in there, he just kind of says to himself, we're going to get out of this, right? It's just a matter of time, right? Talking to this kind of other personality. But the other personality doesn't really seem to answer. And that's a crazy thing, because I don't think it was a different personality at all, because a voice does answer and says, of course we are, Eddie. And Eddie asks, right, who in the heck is that? And this voice says, they put you in solitary, huh? That's terrible. You should never be alone. You deserve so much better than this. After all, you are very special, because it turns out he's talking to the sleeper symbiote, right? Now, the sleeper symbiote is this very slept on symbiote within Marvel Comics. You could almost kind of treat it. It's like this Black Ops wet work type symbiote, right? Like if you want to get to a place in and out, you don't want anybody to catch you and your goal is to like kill that guy, the sleeper symbiote's the one you go with, right? This dude is stealthy as hell, but seemingly the appearance of Jerry, the appearance of Peter Parker, this looks like it was actually the sleeper symbiote in disguise. Now, we don't get any concrete information or indication that that's the case, but that's what it looks like. But at that point, and kind of continuing on, we jump into Queen in Black issue number 2. Now, Queen in Black issue number 2, what's ironic about this is if you go through the reading order, technically there's the Defenders of Light and Dark, which are essentially 2 teams put together by Cable and Tony Stark to go and face off in asymmetrical war against Null and Hela respectively, right? But the reality is that while the Defenders of Light and Dark is presented as a comic you can actually read before the events of Queen in Black issue number 2, I would actually say that it takes place after and during. And the reason why I say that is because this one actually opens up before the Defenders of Light and Dark go on their mission, right? Team Dark and Team Light. So just kind of something to keep in mind if you decide to go through and read the comics in chronological order. But Team Dark, right, that's Iron Man, Cable, Darkstar, Cloak, and Agent Anti-Venom. So basically we're talking about a team that manipulates dark force energy. Then you have Team Light. So you got Beta Ray Bill, you got Photon, you have Sunfire, and then you have Dagger. Photon is Monica Rambeau. I will say in the tie-in, she's pretty dope, although I wish she got a little more in terms of like what she was capable of and they really showed off her power, because if you read Al Ewing's The Mighty Avengers, when she's talking, actually I think it's during Ultimates, when she's talking to Blue Marvel Adam Bashir and he analyzes her using his own powers and science, he's like, yeah, you're basically godly in terms of your power. Monica Rambeau in Marvel Comics, she is cracked. Dude, she's so overpowered and Marvel never uses her like that. And it's almost painful to see, right? I mean, she's literally one of these people where if she uses her powers to their full totality, yeah, she's a one-woman wrecking crew, right? I mean, this girl is just ridiculously overpowered, but Marvel ends up squandering her most of the time and she's just kind of like over there doing some stuff in almost every story. But the fact is, right, at this moment, Cable and Iron Man are talking about the formation of the plan, but the team hasn't really launched yet in a meaningful way. And so that's where they're just kind of like, look, you know, Tony Stark's like, we will launch the team or at least call for you if and when we need any reinforcements. But that's where Cable's just kind of like, okay, like plan A is ready to go, right? Launching these teams. That's fine. It's perfectly serviceable for a plan A, but I've got to wonder, why aren't we going straight for plan B? And that's where Tony Stark is just like, plan B's too risky. And the response of Cable is he says, no, that goth armor of yours is way too risky. You're going up against a cosmic entity that controls light itself, and you're doing it in an untested Hulkbuster that's painted gray. And that's where Tony's like, look, man, it's a Nullbuster suit. And in terms of light absorption, that coating makes black look like the new orange. I've tested it rigorously in simulation, which admittedly is probably not the most surefire way of instilling confidence in Cable, because keep in mind, Cable, this guy's battle hardened, right? And this guy grew up in an environment where you didn't necessarily rely on that kind of stuff. You went out into the field, you fought against the forces of strife or apocalypse, and either you survived or died. And if you survived, you were made stronger for the victory, and you'd go back out and fight again the next day. But when Tony Stark's like, I tested it in a computer simulation, yeah, it doesn't really instill confidence. That being said, Tony Stark's simulations are pretty solid, right? It might as well be as good as fighting in a battlefield. It's not like you put this thing together in a cave with a box of scraps and it's just assuming that it's going to work. But the fact is, right, that one of the things that Cable says is first rule of war, no simulation will ever predict the reality that comes with combat experience, right? And he says, I'm telling you now, plan B is our best chance to take out Null and Hela in one fell swoop. And that's where Tony's like, if it works. Now, we don't know what plan B is quite yet, but if Cable believes it's the only way to win, it's probably worth trusting him, to be honest, right? But Tony Stark says, if it doesn't, we lose the whole game, Nate, and Earth is just the small blind here. Right? Are you really willing to go all in? Because keep in mind, when we're talking about cosmic entities on the level of Hela and Null, given the enhanced power that they now have, more powerful than they have been, it's not simply a fight for Earth. It's a fight for all of reality. It's simply just that their first strike was against Earth. This could have easily been a spacefaring event where the first strike was launched against the Kree or the Skrulls or the Badoon or the Chitauri, and like we focus on that first, but because of the fact that it starts here at Earth, this is where it starts and it's where it has to end. Otherwise, everything is doomed. And it's also Tony Stark just kind of indirectly acknowledging the fact the most powerful beings in the universe are on Earth by and large. Not all of them, but most of them. And so that's why Tony Stark says, I get it, right? Plan B is quick, it's elegant, it's probably right out of Sun Tzu, but there are way too many unknowns. If we're losing, then maybe it's our Hail Mary. But until then, we go with the strategy that we have. And so that's when you switch over to a conversation between Tyr and Hela. And this is why I say, again, you can kind of read, the Defenders of Light and Dark shortly after this. About halfway through this comic is when you jump into Defenders of Light and Dark, because there's reference here from Tyr that's made about having a conversation with Beta Ray Bill and trying to bring Beta Ray Bill to their side. Now, lest we forget, right, all knowledge of Asgardian mythos has been wiped from the minds of everybody on Earth, and presumably everyone across the universe. Beta Ray Bill is the only one who remembers about what Asgard is and everything that it entailed. So he knows about Hela, he knows about Tyr, all these guys. And while Tyr does go on to say that Beta Ray Bill was never a true Asgardian, he says even if the mortals believe he was the author of Thor's great deeds, Thor is dead, right? Isn't he? Who is the guy that Hela's looking at? So it's simply just this idea that Beta Ray Bill can basically turn the tide of battle in their favor, given the immense level of power that he has, even if no one on his side believes anything he says about the reality of Asgard. But that's where Hela actually kind of focuses on what's going on with the mortal Thor. And this is why, while King in Black is an Al Ewing-centric event, based on everything that he's done up to this point, it basically centers on everything that Al Ewing has written up to this point, not simply just everything going on with Venom, right? The Venom story, Null, the whole 9 yards. And one of the things that we know was that at the end of Immortal Thor, and we mentioned this in the last video, but it's worth, mentioning here, at the end of Immortal Thor, that's when the Bifrost Bridge, the Rainbow Bridge, was cut off from Earth. All knowledge of Asgard was cut off from everybody else. Thor, quote unquote, is technically dead. But Sigurd Jarlsson is a guy who exists on Earth that, while he's not technically Thor, and in fact he dreams about Thor and Thor speaks to him directly, there's some kind of a connection between him and Thor. And Hela says that, right? Thor is dead here, but there is one mortal on Earth with an odd connection to our fallen foe. They are much alike. I may investigate this Sigurd Jarlsson. So of course that kind of spins out into the Queen in Black Thor one-shot, which I have no clue what that's going to talk about, and honestly it's still kind of being explored within the actual mortal Thor line of comics in the here and now. But the point is, Tyr just simply says, you shouldn't allow yourself to be distracted by any of this stuff. But that's where Hela just kind of mentions why it is she's even going on this campaign in the first place. And it's pretty simple, to be quite honest. There's no grand nefarious plan, right? Earth is to be a staging ground. If she can take out the superheroes on Earth, then no superhero on Earth will really be able to stand against her in a meaningful way. And because Earth has some of the most powerful superheroes, no one else in the universe will be able to stand against her. And with Asgard cut off from Earth and no one knowing of Asgard's existence, at the end of the day, the plan can go off without a hitch. But more so than any of that, she says, my intention is to create a planetary Norn stone. She says, my rune, carved into the bedrock of Earth, charged with all the power of the Queen in Black, establishing my dominance over Gaia herself, the very sentient nature of Earth. And she says, making me the once and future ruler of the entirety of this universe and all the way to the furthest star. And when that moment comes, when I claim unlimited power, I will reopen the Rainbow Bridge as a road of conquest. First Midgard, and then Asgard, all the other 9 realms. So it's a lot bigger than simply just attacking Earth. It's Hela trying to conquer effectively all of existence, or at least Earth and the other 9 realms. Now, keep in mind, that leaves a lot of territory that would be unconquered by Hela, right? That means that like the realm of hell with Mephisto wouldn't really be conquered by Hela. It means that the realm of Dormammu, right, and the Dark Dimension, right, the realm of Nightmare, places like that, a lot of these other demonic or other dimensional places would largely remain untouched, assuming she doesn't intend to go after them. Now, maybe she would, and it might just kind of be an encompassing statement. The realm of Midgard is effectively the main Marvel universe, and all those places are a part of the main Marvel universe. So you could make a credible argument in saying that, like, indirectly, yeah, she's gonna conquer everything in existence. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, right? How you interpret it, it more or less all comes out to be the same thing. But in the midst of this grand speech, Tyr is just kind of like, and what about Null? Right, like don't forget about him. And she's just kind of like, yeah, that's a good point, right? We should keep him in the forefront because really he's like the only thing that stands in her way. And so at that point, you switch back to Earth with like the heroes doing what they can against the forces of Hela. And that's one of the things to keep in mind. Hela has conscripted a lot of individuals into her service, right? Forcing symbiotes on them by conquering their worlds or outposts or whatever and bringing them in. And that's why you basically have a kind of supreme intelligence in a symbiote form. Now, one of the things that I'm not really sure that I like about this is it feels like Al Ewing is kind of diminishing the significance of a supreme intelligence. Because historically speaking, in Marvel Comics, a supreme intelligence is a big deal, right? The supreme intelligence is historically the leader of the Kree Empire, and it is the collective knowledge of everyone, the brightest minds that have ever existed as part of the Kree Empire. It's the reason why the Supreme Intelligence leads, because it's always this idea that it will know the best course of action with an incredibly high level of probability of success when it comes to that action. A good example of this is that during the Kree Skrull invasion, or at least the Kree Skrull War, that the Supreme Intelligence was the one who advocated for the creation of the Inhuman Project as a way to basically create individuals that had the appearance of different races when they went through the Terrigen Mist, and that what they would do is they would infiltrate other empires and then start seeding chaos and war, right? Discourse, so that you would have these empires that would crumble in on themselves and make it incredibly easy for the Kree to conquer it. It's a page right out of Napoleon Bonaparte here in the real world, to be honest. He was well known for that, going into a country, sowing civil war, and then conquering it when it was at its weakest. And so when you're talking about a supreme intelligence, they are an incredible force. Here, it's just like a symbiote in a jar attacking superheroes. So it just feels very diminishing, to be quite honest, right? It feels like taking a very important concept and just tossing it into the comic book. So rant out of the way, rant out of the way here. You do have Captain Alliance, right? Who again is just kind of like the Kree Skrull version of Captain America, essentially, right? We're just kind of calling it that. But at the end of the day, while he and the other superheroes are doing what they can, there's not a whole lot they can offer in terms of resistance against this thing, right? And that's kind of the funny scenario, is because in the midst of this fight, Spider-Man's cracking jokes, right? And like Captain Alliance is like, Jesus, man, is this guy always like this? And Black Cat is like, no, he gets worse, right? The more danger we're in and the more dire things become, the older and kind of crappier the jokes get. And she's just like half remembered Rodney Dangerfield jokes. That's the red alert. That's when you know that we are all about to die. And so Captain Alliance is like, dude, great, right? Like, why couldn't I have been a part of the other team, which has like Hercules, both Captain Americas, right? Simon Williams Wonder Man, which is kind of amazing to see him here, to be honest. Of course, you don't see any Inhumans because they suck. And so it's kind of cool because these guys show up as another part of the battle going on here. And Steve Rogers does exactly what you would expect, right? Once they land here, hey guys, get the innocents out of the way so we don't have to worry about collateral damage. And so he says, Hercules is providing the sound, right? You, me, and Sam are the light brigade, right? Lightning. Let's see if we can't separate a few symbiotes from their hosts. And so that's where it's like, okay, cool. Because keep in mind, one of the biggest weaknesses of symbiotes is fire, electricity, right? That whole kind of side of energy. But again, we're dealing with something a little bit different here when it comes to Hela's forces. And that's going to come to bear here in a minute. They do have like energy shields and different things like that. But one of the cool things that goes on here, and honestly, I think it's really worth talking about, is Sam Wilson makes the comment, right? Where he says, let's pour it on people and open the comms for the UK heroes to get in touch. MI-13 are holding down the fort somewhere in the big smoke, and we will need all the help we can get. I don't know what it is I kind of love this idea. You almost never see the Marvel superheroes referencing other superheroes from Marvel UK. It's not to say they never do. There's certainly been any number of times, right, when Captain America or Iron Man or any of these guys have teamed up with like Excalibur or Captain Britain, or even had dealings with like the Winter Guard. I mean, hell's bells, the Winter Guard is currently involved in Armageddon right now, right, with like the whole war in Latveria. So it's not as though they never have anything to do with these guys. It's just really cool. It's really, really cool. And I just like it, right? I just like it. I just enjoy the concept, right? But the fact is, we don't really see a whole lot of them. Instead, what we end up doing is switching over to Dylan Brock. Now, one of the things to keep in mind is that Dylan is a guy that has the ability to consciously separate symbiotes from their host. Right, that's like the big ability that he has. And it's kind of manifested and evolved over the years as this character's existed within Marvel Comics, but that's the role he takes here. That in the midst of all of this, he was like, okay, maybe I need to remind you what I can do, right? Maybe it's time for Codex to get back in action, because that's kind of like his, alter ego, right? Really, it was an alternate reality version of himself that had effectively killed all the superheroes and then converted symbiotes into versions of those superheroes. But at the very least, it's a name he's kind of maintained for himself over the years, even through his initial encounters with Null. And so that's why he says, watch and learn, lady. I'm the chain breaker. Remember, and right now, I'm ready to break everything. And that's where Hela's just kind of like, are you now? Because he immediately goes and attacks one of the symbiotes and cuts it off from Hela's hive mind, but it doesn't work. And the reason why it doesn't work is because of the caveat of Asgard, right? She says, the rune of harmony between beings, Asgardian magic forgotten in this realm, and thus impossible to counter. What Hela has joined together, even a prince in black may not carve asunder, but you are the true chain breaker, which makes you a valuable prize in this game. And so that's where the motivation shifts away from destroy the superheroes to capture Dylan Brock. And Dylan doesn't understand why, right? Now again, because Hela is using magic that is not known to Earth because it originates with Asgard, that is a perfect caveat, right? Because no one has the knowledge on how to counter this spell, but it is more powerful than the abilities of Dylan. But Dylan himself, in believing he's the chain breaker and that kind of thing, doesn't understand why Mary Jane Watson as Venom is trying to whisk him out of there as fast as humanly possible. Even when the Fantastic Four show up, technically it's just Johnny Storm alongside Richard Rider, and like, not to diminish them because these guys are solid, although I do want to know, where is Sam Alexander in all of this? I don't remember what happened to Sam Alexander, right? These guys are powerhouses. Dylan Brock, keep in mind, is still a teenage kid. Teenage kids are reckless, right? Teenage kids just kind of leap before they look. They don't think about the bigger picture. And so all Dylan is really focused on in the here and now is, I want to stay and fight. But that's when the cases argue to him, look, here's the problem. Yes, you're a chain breaker. You have the ability to effectively break symbiotes away from the hive mind and even their own hosts. But Mary Jane Watson tells him, right, Hela does not want the chain breaker. She wants a chain maker. If she gets you on her side, she can control any symbiote she wants to. Because lest we forget, there are some symbiotes, like Sleeper, that are not part of the hive mind. They are separated in one form or another. And there's other symbiotes out there like that. But if she has him, she dominates everyone, and it bolsters her forces. Because what's so ironic about this is she's essentially using foot soldiers, right? If we were to take symbiotes and we were to place them next to the superhero landscape, really like the human world, right? You have just regular people walking around in the world, right? Just regular Joes, J. Jonah Jameson, right? But then you have people with powers, people who are enhanced. Symbiotes are very much the same way. You've got your grunt symbiotes, your foot soldiers, which is most of what you see here. And then you have other symbiotes that have abilities. They are unique in some capacity. Venom, Carnage, Toxin, Sleeper. And these are the ones that are not really connected to the hive mind. If Hela can get her hands on that, it would be like her ensnaring the Avengers or the X-Men even, right? Some of the most powerful beings in existence. You see the danger here in her getting her hands on Dylan Brock. And that's the crazy thing, is because in the midst of all of this, it ultimately plays out exactly like that. Marvel Boy makes a return in Marvel Comics, and while Noh-Varr does have this just very lengthy history in Marvel, he's actually a Kree soldier from an alternate reality. What makes his arrival on the battlefield and the fact that he's been ensnared by Hela so significant is he's like the perfect soldier in almost every conceivable way. He can wall crawl like Spider-Man, he's got mental control over his body, he can do all kinds of stuff, to say nothing of like just the regular powers that people normally get, super strength, speed, durability, different things like that. But his battle strategy, that's really what gives him the upper hand, so that when the time comes that Dylan goes to attack Marvel Boy's just like quantum swap. And at that point, ends up switching out Dylan Brock, where Dylan Brock is immediately captured by the supreme intelligence of the symbiotes. And at that point, he's being whisked away back to Hela. So in an instant, the worst case scenario for pretty much everybody on Earth just happened. And most of the superheroes have no idea that it happened. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, drop a like. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.